Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome. We're going to explore my solution to the VPC Challenge Lab I gave you. Now, I want to make it clear that what I show you is not the correct solution, but it should be a correct solution. It's entirely possible that you did something different, and that's just fine. You need to be thinking in terms of successful results, not following patterns. And success includes enabling the data flow you want, preventing the data flow you don't want, meeting any other stated requirements, following best practices, and balancing all of the other trade-offs like cost, simplicity, maintainability, etc. Now, in this associate level course, we don't need to get nearly as deep into managing trade-offs as we do at the professional level, but you still need to keep them in mind anyway. Also, I need to reiterate that this is a challenge lab. So if you haven't already done the lab on your own before watching this, then you're robbing yourself of a really important learning value. This course won't properly teach you what you need if you ignore what I say. Alright, let's quickly recap what we want to accomplish in this lab. We want a two-tier setup, front-end and back-end. We're going to use ping to represent the traffic, even though in the real world we would use different protocols and ports. We want the front end to accept incoming requests from the internet and be able to connect outbound to both the back end and the internet, but the back end should only accept its incoming requests from the front end or from other back end instances, and it shouldn't be able to make connections outbound. We also want, as much as possible, for our firewall rules to be based on service accounts, not based on network tags or subnets. Now it's these last three lines here that give people the most trouble when they're trying to do it on their own. So we'll dig into those in just a bit. We're going to start our walkthrough by looking at the subnets. Now maybe you expected me to walk you through creating every resource, but I'm not actually going to do that. Remember that we're going a lot faster now than we were before. You have to be able to connect information like I'm showing you to the resources they represent, and then both mentally and practically walk through creating them. Now, if you still find this difficult, don't worry. That's actually really good information to realize. Just look closely at what I show you and try to work it out, poke around in the console a bunch and take a look at some docs, but also don't feel bad to ask people for help on our course forums either. And look at some of the discussions that have already happened there, because you might actually get the answer you need. But okay, let's look at these subnets that I've created. What do you notice about them? Well, one of the things you might notice is the flow logs over on the right-hand side. But I'll give you a heads up right now that those are not required for the solution. In fact, I only turned those on because I was debugging something that was giving me trouble. It turned out in this case that I was actually making a mistake with my test, so I didn't need to make more changes to the setup. But I just left the flow logs on because it doesn't really hurt anything. This is a low-volume testing VPC, so we don't really have to worry too much about the cost of those flow logs, and they might come in handy with some future thing that I do. In your case, though, you can choose either way, no big deal. The second thing you might notice here if you've tried to do this yourself is that I've created 9 firewall rules. But this is actually a couple more than we really need too, but I'll get to that in a bit. Another thing to notice is that I made these two subnets in completely different regions, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on too. The last thing to notice here before we move on is that these two subnets use similar IP address ranges. There's no specific reason why I made one 0 and the other 20, except that I wanted them to be close together, sharing the same 192.168 prefix, but not right next to each other either, in case I needed to expand one of these subnets later. For the instance templates, I made 2 versions of each one, just to make things a little simpler for testing. One version is the normal locked down version, and the other version is exactly the same, but it adds the OpenSSH tag network tag to the instances, so that I can more easily SSH to them for testing. Now, I would not recommend this approach for production though, because now you'll have 2 copies beside each other that could get out of sync from one another. Even if you create these things with templates or scripts, they still have the potential to diverge. In real life, you would probably have a development project where you can test things out and where SSH is always allowed, but maybe restricted to your known IP addresses. And you'd have a separate production project that doesn't allow SSH to any instances. And you would have to jump through annoying hoops to even consider opening that up. The more difficult it is for you to use SSH in prod, the more likely you are to do the right thing and design your systems to not need it. Ever. Even for debugging. You need to build proper logging and debugging systems instead. But right now, we need to get in there and test things to support our learning, which is why we can be okay with this shortcut for now. Oh, and by the way, you would hopefully create those two projects I mentioned, the dev and prod ones I mean, using the same templates and scripts, just with a flag that tells them whether they should create resources to act like prod or act like dev. But that's getting a lot deeper than you need for this level. Let's move on to the instance groups that use those templates. Now, there's not much to say here except that I've decided to put the front end and back end in different regions. Now, this would generally be a bad idea for production because the communication across those two regions would be slower than it needs to be. It would also be more expensive because you have to pay for cross-region traffic. But I wanted to show you how incredibly easy it is to do this. Global network, regional subnets, and subnets are not how you do security. This is very different from how Amazon Web Services does VPCs, and because it's so different, Google is quite likely to test you on these things in your exam. Oh, and all of the config that we do will work regardless of the subnet, region, or zone where the instances are located. Security is not defined based on location, it's based on intention. You set things up to allow traffic you intend and block traffic you don't intend based on the logical purpose of those various instances. Okay, on to the firewall rules. I'll see you in the next lecture.